such rhinos remain? Right, all right. So we want to go back to our top story this morning. Remember that we also wanted to hear your thoughts on this one. We're asking you, who is to blame for riparian land encroachment? That is our Twitter poll. We're asking you. Talk to us. Hashtag is KTN News Centre. Tweet me at Betty M. Kialo. We'll be happy to hear your responses on this one. Coming back to the studio, I want to introduce my guests right now. Dr. Gabriel Muturi, who's a Deputy Director, Forest Biodiversity and Environment and Management, Kenya Forestry Research Institute. Thank you very much for your time, sir. All right, first things first, I just want you first to describe for us, what is riparian land from the basics?
Riparian land is that land which is between the river being a stream, and the other terrestrial ecosystem. Normally, if you have to think about it as a lay person, there will be usually there will be a river, a stream, where the water flows. Then next to it there's a bank, and after that there is a land which is normally dominated by vegetation that is usually adapted to wetlands or situations which at times they are at the submersion of the water, and occasionally they are also dry. So the riparian ecosystem can be described according to various definitions, but the one which is commonly adopted in Kenya would normally be like the width, which is equivalent to the width of the river channel on both sides.
On both sides.
In some aspects of the law, this is described to extend between 2 meters up to 30 meters. And
that's on either side of
the river. So if we give an example of major rivers, for example, the Tana River, as it flows from the mountain towards the delta, the river channel increases in size, in width. And therefore, equally so, the riparian ecosystem associated with such kind of a river also do expand.
All right.
Yeah.
Interesting. So let's now talk about the places. Is this riparian land across, the whole country? Is it in specific places? Because what you describe is, is going to lead us into the discussion to do with, floods and really encroachment on this particular lands.
First of all, from your question, it was to get an understanding of what is riparian ecosystem.
Yes.
And it is that zone which is buffer zone between the mainland and the wetlands.
Right.
And if you think about it in terms of the floods we are seeing now, the riparian ecosystem has a number of functions, and specifically with respect to floods, it serves the purpose of reducing the energy of the water that is flowing from the mainland to the streams. It also serves the function of filtering the sediments. And if you think about floods in particular, it's described as that volume of water that overflows from the main water channel.
Yes.
Then, what are the factors associated with this? A river channel will have specific volume, which is determined by its depth and width. When the riparian ecosystem is destroyed, and therefore there's no trapping of silt, a lot of sediments will accumulate on the stream. And therefore the volume of the water that originally ought to be accommodated by such a stream will reduce. With such reduction of the capacity to hold the volume, therefore at the event of any rainfall, the amount of overflow, which is floods, will also increase.
All right. So does that mean, rightly so, that the reason why we're seeing all this destruction of property is that there has been encroachment on and destruction of the riparian ecosystem?
In Kenya, you are correct. I think the riparian ecosystem has not been very well managed. And looking at even the law, I see riparian ecosystem described, for example, in the Water Act, and also in the Forest Act. And the Forest Conservation and Management Act provides for their protection. But what is the practice? Even if you look at a situation like in Nairobi now, we cannot talk of having any riparian vegetation. There was an attempt by the late Michuki to reclaim, for example, Nairobi River. But if you look at other parts of the city, you don't see any vegetation at all. What you see is just concrete, and therefore when the rain falls, the concrete will just allow tremendous runoff to occur. And that will mean all the volume of the water will go to the channel. The channel, as I said earlier, has specific capacity which it can hold. And the amount that it cannot be contained is the floods.
Is the floods.
Yeah.
All right. So let's go back also to just the description that you gave about the riparian ecosystem. So what kind of vegetation are we talking about?
It differs from place to place. In some cases, it could be grass and associated grass species and herbaceous species, which doesn't necessarily grow into a forest. But further down, in this example I gave, like the Tana River, the Takwa, the Sonyiro, it transforms into what we call riverine forests. It doesn't matter what kind of vegetation we are talking about, because even if it is grass, grass has that capacity to trap CO2 and also to reduce the water energy. And therefore, if that happens, the flow into the stream is also reduced. And also, the siltation of the stream is reduced. And therefore, the river will also have now the capacity to hold the water. But there are so many factors I think we need to think about when we talk about floods. Experts in climate change have predicted a long time ago that what we are seeing there could also be a factor of climate change, in that the rain gets so intense within such a short period. And even if the riparian vegetation was there, and then the rainfall event is so intense with so much water within a short time, of course, still the capacity for the channel to hold the water will be exceeded, and floods will still be there. It
will be there. Yeah. All right, but it's interesting that you say that no matter the kind of vegetation that is on the riparian land, it is indeed able to hold the water, and that's the problem that I want us to get to, because we're seeing very many properties right now in the city and even across other counties getting destroyed because of the floods. So does it mean that people are oblivious to the fact that this, the riparian land should be left with, or is it just, the corruption where you see that, this is a riverbank, or this is somewhere that is close to, a river, but you still see construction developments coming up?
I think it's a challenge we have in the country, encroachment of public land, because riparian ecosystem, as I said earlier, being that buffer zone between the mainland and the stream, is supposed to be left as a public utility land. And there should not even be constructions, in my view, because normally, when you have water somewhere, even the structure may not be that firm for construction. It can only be land used for a certain other purpose, but not necessarily constructions. Because if that is where naturally the water flows, even the foundation would also eventually be degraded and destroyed over time by the current of water flowing. And obviously, that will have devastating effects, including like houses collapsing. Yeah.
So who is to blame? Because we're seeing this encroachment on the riparian land or the wetlands. So who really should be, on the receiving end?
A very difficult question, I would say. But more important, I would say, is the authorities responsible for law enforcement to ensure that nobody encroaches on public land. And also, as the public, we have got a very high appetite for land, particularly in the urban areas. And you'll find that mostly, even people knowingly, would still go and buy land, which is meant to be public land, be it on the roadside reserve, be it on the river. So I think it's also a question of the community being, I think, more patriotic, not even also getting engaged into further encroachment of what is supposed to be public land.
All right.
And particularly the lands which are supposed to be serving specific functions, be it road reserve, be it riparian. Yeah.
All right. And so, if I'm a buyer and I want to buy some land and there's somebody who's selling land to me, is there a way of knowing that this indeed is riparian land? Because like you mentioned, you've rightly given a challenge to Kenyans, but then how would I know as a common Mwananchi that, this place is actually a wetland?
These areas are designated because, as I said earlier, it's a buffer zone. And if you happen to see a stream, before you even think about buying land, then you should ask yourself a question. How far am I from the middle of the river stream? Because as I said earlier, if it is decided that the riparian ecosystem should extend up to a certain length, maybe 30 meters or so, from the middle of the river stream, either sides, and you are seeing a stream, then even you as a Mwananchi, at least you have the capacity to know what I'm likely to engage in now here falls within the riparian ecosystem.
Right.
So one way would also be publicizing so much about what is designated as riparian ecosystem for people also to know. But more equally, we need also, most of the land that is designated government land, most of the time, is very, very clearly left aside. But it's a question of time that you find people encroach. But if you're a person who doesn't have access to, let's say, information in terms of where the extent reaches, I think the safer way is to make your own observation first. Is there a river nearby? Is there a lake nearby? And therefore, the area adjacent to it, this riparian ecosystem.
It's riparian.
Yeah.
All right. Let's also just talk about the impact of the floods. Of course, we've seen, these floods destroying, properties. People wake up and they no longer have, their items in the house. Apart from that, what does it do largely to the whole ecosystem?
The floods?
The encroachment on riparian land.
When you talk about what it does to the ecosystem, from an ecological perspective, I said the vegetation will serve the purpose of trapping the CO2. It will also, if you talk about plants themselves, they have the capacity to absorb some residues that are coming, let's say, from the industries, from the farms, and they play a significant ecological functions that is a process of water purification. So if there's no riparian vegetation, all these residues will add up into the river.
Okay.
When they add up to the river, they are polluting, they're increasing pollution. And therefore, increased pollution will have very adverse effects, even on the biodiversity of the marine ecosystems. Yeah.
Interesting. I just want you to see the pictures on the screen, and of course, I'm sure you've been able to follow through with, these pictures we've been seeing and footage and stories we've been covering of. And there you go, cars, being submerged into water. So do you think that really maybe there should be more information given out, to the public to understand that, even where they park their cars? Look at that. So really devastating. As an environmentalist, what do you feel when you see such pictures, knowing, of course, that maybe it's Kenyans who really do not know about all these issues?
I think the responsible government institutions have given what we can call early warning, if you recall, like from the Met. But then institutions like this picture here would reflect mainly some kind of a system failure of drainage system. Yesterday I came across an alert from National Environment Management Authority.
Yes.
And it's attributing some of these to the siltation and also the clogging of the systems by plastics and such things.
Right.
So what should be happening perhaps before the onset of the rainy season, a city like Nairobi should really engage in a very rigorous campaign in cleaning and clearing the drainage system. Because some of these is not necessarily an aspect of the riparian ecosystem,
right,
but perhaps poor drainage systems. Yeah.
All right, and of course, there was the clampdown on plastic paper bags, but it's still the paper bags. We're not seeing that continue. Maybe it will, maybe in the next few months, but we're not seeing that happen to the other plastics, which, of course, you saw pictures of the plastics clogging the drainage. What do you say about that? The effect of plastics on, of course, our environment.
Of course, that's why they are polluting and really posing a lot of challenges, and that's why there's a ban on the plastics. And I do hear now that even the next stage could be targeting the plastic bottles.
Yeah.
But I think it's common knowledge to all of us that one, the plastics do not degrade. They are not biodegradable. And it takes a lot of time before they can even be reduced to materials that can be said have disintegrated a little bit.
Yes.
So I appreciate the ban personally. And but there could also be another opportunity in that instead of littering our environment with the plastics, the element of making sure, I think it's some certain issues to do with our responsibility. Because even now when you use the bottle and you litter them, the environment with the bottles, very rarely do people reflect on what could be the effect thereafter.
Of that.
Yeah.
All right. Coming from, the environmental, areas, when you look at this big conversation also to do with environmental conservation, of course, we have had a very big conversation on planting of trees. Yeah. How adverse is the situation from your end, coming from, the Kenya Forestry?
I come from Kenya Forest Research Institute, but when we talk about the forest, there has been a lot of interest in the recent past about the condition of Kenyan forests. If you want to attribute the floods to forest scenario, it should be reflected in terms of the water catchments. Because if the water catchments themselves are not optimally managed, then there will be increased surface runoff, and that also contributes to floods. But as a sector, I think we have made very good progress in that if you have been following the statistics of forest cover in this country, previously we were talking about 3%, 2%, and now we are above 7%. And I think there's good intention from ourselves, from the sector, and even now the political will, because it is realized that forest plays a very crucial mitigation when it comes to the kind of disasters we are seeing in floods. You had said about tree planting. Is at the moment we are in tree planting season, and I do recall from where I come from, our emphasis is not only tree planting as such, but also there's a need to manage the trees that are planted, because forestry is not supposed to be taken casually as we see.
Yes.
Forestry is a science, and it's a management science in itself. Trees are planted, they require to be nurtured and well protected. What challenges then faces the forest sector? You realize that when you talk about the energy in this country, talk of charcoal, we could be talking about conservation here, but on the other side, we are also talking about real needs, real needs in terms of fuelwood. So I think sometimes those are the issues that constrain the forestry sector.
All right.
Yeah.
But you're saying that there has been at least an improvement
a big improvement. 10% is the vision that was put for 2030, but chances are we are going to exceed that before 2030.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for speaking to us, Dr. Gabriel Muturi, Deputy Director of the Forest Biodiversity and Environment Management at the Kenya Forestry Research Institute. Thank you very much for your time.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. So we will, of course, be getting your views. Let me just see if there are some views online. Remember, we're asking you really who is to blame for these menace. You've seen quite a number of